reason why a lot of people, when they start hanging out with a particular person or a particular group, start to act really weird and crazy. And I'll tell you this whole idea of cult programming, which I detail in great specificness, and I have chapters in Conquering the Matrix on cult-like mind control, MK Ultra, and satanic ritual abuse. And here's a chapter here, the occult Nazis and monarch mind control. Here's another chapter. The root problem in denying the reality of mind control and satanic ritual abuse is not believing in God's word. Okay, that's from my book, Conquering the Matrix. So you can get these books at a financial discount by ordering the book bundles, right? Order 2 book bundles, man, and educate yourself. Pass it around. Make the youth group read it. And if you're a parent whose kid is in some kind of youth group, kick the pastor in the posterior in a loving way and say, look, I want something relevant. I just don't want to teach my kid, shine, Jesus, shine, for 45 minutes of worship. It's important that we worship God, but your kid is being forced, your daughter and your kid. Let's not play games about it. I'm the father of 3. They're grown now. They're out of the house. I'm the father of 3. And as you can imagine, I'm not the type of guy you want to debate with, okay, because you're going to lose. It's a foregone conclusion. So my kids I taught them a biblical worldview, et cetera, and the content of their education, even in the Christian schools, the state was slipping in all this anti-Christian programming, all this anti-Christian messaging, all this anti-Christian morality messaging. Okay? In other words, my kids were being brainwashed after I had prepared them against brainwashing. And what I've learned up until this very moment, studying and observing the cult-like behavior in many major cities in America, people are acting crazy. They're acting like they belong to a cult. They use special inclusive language that are, when you examine and you really know what these words mean, words like, let's have a conversation about this. That's a mind control hypnotic word. Or let's have a conversation about this. That's a mind control word. Or the new normal. That's a mind control word. There's about a narrative. That's a mind control word. But if you're so dumbed down and you're sitting there drooling over yourself and people are using these mental hypnotic tricks on you and your children, you're going to get punch drunk. You're going to get pounded in the face so many times because they're going to slip in. Let's have a conversation about this. And then as a Christian, they know they're going to make you feel guilty. They're going to try to shame you and think, well, you're not loving. See, you can't go into a confrontation with somebody who is trained, even if it's 3 weeks of training, on how to take you apart psychologically. You have to know. So you read Conquering the Matrix by Paul McGuire, and it's like you've learned Christian jiu-jitsu on an attacking enemy. There will not be much of an attack. They will be drooling on the floor instead of you drooling in the chair. No, I don't apologize for that. I'm sick of seeing Christians torn apart because they didn't get any training or preparation on how to defend themselves mentally. And look, and you know why I feel strongly like this? Because any kid who doesn't think inside the mold or the template or asks serious questions like, is the Bible true? You and I both know that they're going to be humiliated by the students, humiliated by the professors and teachers, laughed at, shamed, ostracized, called a religious nut, insulted, one up and down and another. And nobody's going to be concerned about their rights. Nobody's going to, we hear words like systemic racism. That's cute. That's a mind control word, by the way. Systemic racism is a Marxist mind control word. You need to know why. But they can systemically be racist against your Christian religion, your Christian beliefs, your Christian morality. And they do. They pass laws all day long that directly attack your Christian beliefs, your Christianity, your relationship with Jesus Christ, your belief in biblical morality. They attack it. They outlaw it. They violate the freedom of speech. They violate freedom of the press. They violate freedom of religion. Everything can be open. I guess a whorehouse can be open. I don't know. I don't go to whorehouses. A house of prostitution. They call them sex workers in California. I'm not putting them down as individuals, but that seems to be a legitimate employment classification. So I guess they're essential workers. And a church is not essential. Workers is not essential. You can sell pot in a pot place. California pot is legal. So marijuana is an essential service, but going to church is not. And to show you how insane they are, even using their own paradigm of logic and reason, which every Christian must know how to use the force of their opponent against them. Don't let that slip by. Okay. When you're attacked, there's the force of your opponent coming against you. When you know martial arts, you're not going to wear yourself out using your force to defeat them. You're going to take the force of your opponent and then flip them and use the very force they exerted against you because you've been trained. Now that force will be flipped and that force will come at them. Their own force is going to hammer them. Say, that's not Christian. Hey, baby, I don't know what kind of Bible you read, but sitting there and being stupid and not being able to answer any single basic, primitive theological question about Jesus, about God, God's goodness in the Bible, to even be able to attempt to give an adequate explanation to those questions. And I'll give you an example, and I'm not picking up on it, but it was a disgrace. When, what's his name? He's the pastor of the big church, was it at Austin, Texas? What's his name? He's got the wife. He's got massive mansion. He's been on Oprah. What is his name? Forgot his name. What is his? Oh, Joel Osteen. I caught him twice on Larry King on CNN. Larry King is a sharp Jew that's been around the block and worked his way up in entertainment from New York City and other places. I hung out with a lot of people. I can see what he's thinking in his eyes. So Larry King is asking these most simplistic questions to Joel Osteen on what the Bible means that any non-believer might want to ask. Okay, like, how can a loving God do this? Is there really a heaven or really a hell? Who's going to heaven? Who's going to hell? I mean, these are honest questions. Joel Osteen, in this 45 to an hour a minute interview, his answer to Larry King, every time he was given a simple biblical God question that normal people would ask and normal people want the answer to. These were simple questions. What's his name? Oh, Joel Osteen. Joel Osteen, his answer to every one of Larry King's legitimate simple questions were kind of like, oh, shucks, Larry, I don't know. That's too far above me. I'm just a simple guy. He weaseled. He weaseled his way. Joel Osteen weaseled his way out from having to answer the question like 6 different times in a row. Every time Larry King would throw them what they call in the business a softball question, Joel Osteen couldn't even begin to answer it. Now, it's not that he couldn't have. He could have, but it meant he would have had to study, prepare, get educated. And it doesn't mean that you have to deny your faith. It means that you have to know and you have to educate yourself so when you're asked a question, you're prepared to defend your faith. He was the most despicable male Christian leadership role model I have ever seen in my life. As every time he was asked a question, he did one of these. Well, oh shucks, Larry. I just don't know. I'm a simple guy. My father was just a tent preacher, and Larry's a sophisticated, sharp Jew in New York, from New York, like Woody Allen. They're not stupid. He knew that Joel Osteen was giving him a shuck and jive, avoid the answer, because he knew, Larry King knew, that Joel Osteen really wanted to be popular and please everybody. So Joel Osteen wasn't going to even remotely acknowledge the existence of hell. And Larry King did not respect him at all. Larry King looked at him like, what are you? Can't even answer these simple questions that everybody asks all the time. You can't even answer them. And then you could see it in Larry King's eyes. Larry King was not against Christians or Christianity. Larry King was disgusted by this guy's weaselly avoiding and not having the chutzpah to at least stand up and defend what you believe. But instead you copped out. Every time you copped out by, well, I don't know. That's theologians have been asking. He would never even use the word theologian. People have been asking that question for millions of years. Who am I to, Larry, who am I to? It was pathetic. I wanted to barf. It was a cop-out. And so I decided to, because I had the power, I used it. Unlike a lot of guys who have the power, and there's a lot of guys with a lot more power than me, but unlike a lot of guys with the power, I'm not afraid to use it. Because you see, I'm not afraid of losing my power that God gave me. I'm very aware that God gave me my power and platform. And I'm very aware that if I displease God, God can take away my power and platform in a moment. So since I've got it settled in my head that it's God that raises a man up and God that pulls a man down, I know where my source is. So I don't have to sit there and spread everybody's butter on a TV interview and disgrace the gospel of Jesus Christ by pretending I'm an idiot and not being in season and out of season, ready to give a reasonable answer for the truths of the gospel. So I'm not being mean in what I did. Because, see, nobody else will challenge him. So, well, who are you to challenge him? I was him to challenge him in a spontaneous moment on stage at Jack Hibbs Church in Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills. And it was a big Bible prophecy conference. Pastor Jack Hibbs, great man of God, was there. It was at his church. David Hawking, the great Bible teacher, was there. And a whole lot of other people. Right? Chuck Misler was there. Tim LaHaye was there. And I'm forgetting a lot of important speakers, so forgive me. Anyway, when I went up to speak, I often will go into spontaneous mode. And so I was I didn't name the guy by name out of courtesy. And at the time that this was being professionally television taped, I didn't know it was going to be played anywhere besides this church or the Bible conference, Bible prophecy conference circuit. I didn't know it was going to end up broadcasting a lot of times on God TV all over the world. So I'm doing my thing, and I'm talking about the importance for Christians and Christian leaders to be faithful to the Word of God. And then in one of these exhilarating moments that I get, creative inspiration, I abandon all caution to the wind, which is not always a good thing. And I take up my big leather-bound King James Bible, not in disrespect, and I start holding it up and I start dancing like a male ballerina with my toes pointed straight down in my leather dress shoes. Now, why that's weird is that if I was not in that creative zone, aha moment of consciousness, I would never have done that. Because I know I would have, in my normal state of consciousness, I would have fallen flat on my face before 5,000 people. I'm serious. So don't ask me why I did it. I was definitely violating my physical danger zone. But I was able, no, I didn't fall. It was perfectly executed. I was shocked that I could actually do it. And I did this imitation of this guy preaching and dancing like a ballerina around the Word of God. And the audience got it because I explained it and put down the Word of God on the ground and danced like a ballerina. And they went crazy and they were applauding. I thought I was being somewhat subtle. How stupid of me. Because after the talk, everybody came up to me and said, that was a great imitation of Joel Osteen. I didn't mention his name. So, I was trying to make a point. I was not trying to hurt Joel Osteen's feelings. But what he did was disgraceful. It was disgraceful. And disgraceful in the sense that whether he likes it or not, he's a role model for Christian men. So, and Larry King was offended by it because it was disingenuous. So what happened was I forgot about it. But anyway, a giant Christian network started airing this over and over again because it got such a huge popular response. And then they kept airing. This went on for like 7 years. They aired it countless times. This giant Christian television network aired my entire message with me throwing down the Bible, dancing around it, the whole thing. They aired it on national television, one of the biggest Christian TV networks, endless times for almost 7 years. Then mysteriously one day, it's taken off the air. Somebody tells me, which means it got recently taken off the air. Now, why would they, and they have all my other conferences up there, why would they take out this one and keep all my other ones? Well, it's obvious. Either Joel or his wife, I forgot his wife's name, Joel or his wife saw it and they were offended. I had to guess who's his wife. And they would never do it, but they have their big CEO or somebody call up and pressure the network because they spend a lot of money buying airtime for those giant Sunday morning services. You know, they're a big client. They're spending big advertising dollars on these networks. So that show, which was one of the most popular shows where I did dancing, got mysteriously taken down. And the minute I found that out, I started laughing. I started laughing because there's no way on earth that program got taken down with the fact that it was aired in series with some of the most respected Bible teachers in the nation, and that particular message I gave with dancing around the Bible was one of the most popular programs that was aired on that network over a 7-year period. Perfect. Anyway, somebody, I can't prove it, so this is an allegation on my part. I don't know it to be a fact. You know why I have to say it, folks. You can figure it out. Christian love only goes so far, right? Christian love only goes so far. So I'm not saying that this is what I believe happened. I'm very clear about this. It possibly could have happened. Okay, they could have just rotated the schedule. It may have nothing to do with the dancing, and my theory may be completely false. So I'm not saying it's a fact. I'm not saying I believe this happened. I'm simply alleging that it is possible. It could have been. Not that it did happen, that it could have been, possibly. Remote chance, because after all, we're dealing with ministry of great integrity, etc. But it could have been that somebody, or a man or woman talking about, likes their muscle, and hypothetically speaking, somebody could have called that network, complained, and says, you have a speaker making fun of so-and-so and so-and-so. And then they would have said privately on the guy who does the ballet thing. Now, my intention was not to make fun of someone with the intention of hurting them or lying about it. That would unpunishable. Okay? My intention was to say, hey, no man of God, including Paul McGuire, and I believe that was also part of the sermon, no man of God, including Paul McGuire, has the right to dance around the Bible. We must rightly divide the Word of God, line by line, precept by precept. That's all it was about. I didn't mention his name or his wife's name. I was somewhat obscure. I didn't know that my impromptu dancing of a ballet preacher would have been so obvious to people. But it was, but that's not my fault. In any case, sometimes you've got to think out of the box and act out of the box to communicate the truth. So get educated. It was for this most famous, probably the most famous preacher in America, for the most famous preacher in America, to be asked a list of 6 or 7 questions that are the most basic and simple questions to ask about the Bible and about Jesus Christ. And on every one of them, he refuses to answer and comes up with a shuck and jive excuse that is so lame that even Larry King's temper is being tested. That is worse than pathetic. That is worse than pathetic. And I'll leave it at that. You should not be. The Bible says that you can choose to be a fool. You're not a fool. I'm not a fool. God's people are not supposed to be characterized as fools. But when God's leaders act like fools on national television or whatever, well, it doesn't help our cause, does it? So we need to combat this. Again, the goal is not to attack, embarrass, or demean people. But people at that level, okay, that's the only way to get their attention. You have to, sending them an email, a letter, that will do almost no good. Because they're not going to read it. They'll send you a computer answer. But if they're sitting there watching a television network that they're on, and they're watching, their own show run, or if they're sitting there and they happen to be watching, because the one that I was on aired countless times for 7 years, there's a good chance, since they're very familiar with the network, that they actually watched the message I did with the dancing ballerina. Now, if they ask themselves, is there any truth in this? Do I come off, honey? Do I come off like a guy who's always like dodging the Word of God? Honest conversation, accountability. No, that guy you just saw is unfair. Fine, okay, maybe I was unfair. I don't think I was, but did they have that honest accountability conversation? I don't know. I can't judge it because I don't know. But I do know this. Mysteriously, the show was taken off the air, and mysteriously, the problem has never been solved. It's part of the great apostasy. And that's bad. And I can either tell the truth about it, or I can commit the exact same thing. I'll let you be the judge. Pray for me. That's spiritual warfare. Believe me, heat comes in unexpected sources when you step on the toes, but I didn't step on the toes. I was the toes. That wasn't a joke, but I'm laughing. Not at anyone's misfortune, but laughing over the absurdity of the language. Anyway, the bottom line is, my intention wasn't to hurt or attack this individual, although I couldn't say anything that probably would hurt or attack him and his wife. They're insulated. I will say this regarding a particular individual, also in the ministry, that I will not name. This person was appearing on Oprah Winfrey along with his wife. And I noticed, because I'm a feature film producer, I'm a television producer, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I noticed that when they did the opening shot, normally an interview crew for Oprah or whatever would do, 30 second, 60 second, 90 second film showing the house, because the house is a huge, magnificent mansion. So you would show part of that. You wouldn't hide it. It's part of the story of the person you're interviewing, that they live in a colossal mansion. That was totally missing from the footage. Where they start the shot is they don't allow the cameramen with the tripods, like when you open the door to this mansion, like many mansions, not that I've been in all that many, but I've seen enough of them, they start with a small doorway entrance. I mean, it's small but magnificent at the same time. And then it takes you into a little, like, half of a room where in the old days people used to hang their coats. And then you would proceed into, like, the opening hallway of the house, and you'd see these giant flights of stairs going up to the left and right in a very poetic manner. And then you could see kitchen, dining room. And what you would see is a massive, massive mansion with tennis courts, swimming pools, gardens, endless rooms, because that's what the house was. It was the same kind of house that Tom Cruise would have owned for himself. Okay, but they hide all that, and you hear the engineers and stuff, and they air this. They start videotaping and audio taping in the little room where you could hang your coats, that little mini hallway that very large houses have before you get into the real part of the house. And they decided that they wanted to do the interview right there, which to me, I'm going, as a film producer, why would they shoot an interview in a half room with no windows and just light behind them? I mean, this house must have 1,000 magnificent palatial backgrounds, a stunning fireplace, stunning kitchen, stunning evening room or whatever. That would be beautiful on camera and much warmer. These people own this gigantic mansion, and they're shooting the interview with Oprah Winfrey in a half a room where there's these slit windows that you have in the half room. But the windows are deliberately done artistically so you can't see out of them. And I said to myself, this is very interesting. What are they hiding? Because whenever I see what I'm seeing, especially when it's movie stars' homes and stuff, whenever I see what I'm seeing and I'm not allowed to see something else, the film producer in me says, what are they hiding? They're deliberately constructing this shot, not because it's the most beautiful or attractive, but the purpose of this shot is to not allow, to make the audience think that they've been invited into the home of this big shot minister, when in reality the purpose of this shot is to not show you from that little slat window how far away the next house is, what the front of their house looks like, or any of the other rooms in the house. The only purpose for shooting in the hallway is you want to hide from the TV viewer anything that suggests how wealthy, how large, how expensive, how big this mansion is. You say, Paul, how do you know that? It's like I've told you, I do my homework. After watching this interview, I looked up on the internet the interior of the home of the super wealthy evangelist that I'm talking about. So by going into images on Google, I now see the kitchen. I now see the exterior. I now see how far their house is from their neighbor house. I also go up on Google Earth search, and I can see the neighborhood they live. And I get to see basically all the rooms in the house. Maybe not how it's decorated now, but I get a real, no, it was how it was decorated. And so I realize, it confirms my worst suspicions, that all the shots that they took were designed to cleverly hide from the viewer what their house really looked like and what the exterior looked like, especially how close their house was to the neighbors and the neighborhood they lived in. Because all of these things would have given the television watching audience the inside view of just how really filthy rich and wealthy they were, and how they were pretending, by simply concealing the visibility, indicators of wealth. I'll give you an example. when the cameramen were first setting up, and they used this as part of the footage, that slot and that clouded window that you could look out before they adjusted it, before they actually started their main intro to the future, and it was only for a few seconds. But I could see out the window to the side of the door of their house, and in that 3-second uncensored view, before they later camouflaged it, I was able to see how large the front of their house was by the endless green grass and trees. But then way, way, way off in the distance, I could see the front of the closest house to them down the street. For some reason, this slotted window gave a perfect viewpoint, as if you were standing outside looking down the street of this multi-millionaire pastor. And I realized that this other mansion was not close to them. There's wealthy neighborhoods where it's mansion and it's kind of close to the next mansion and kind of close to the next mansion. But in the really, really wealthy neighborhoods, your mansion, and there may be no mansion at all in visibility, but way, way, way down a couple of blocks, I could see the outside of another mansion. So this told me in a couple of seconds a couple of things. Number one was they were hiding their true wealth by hiding the true size and interior of their house, by shooting in the place where you hang up your coats, for crying out loud. Number two is they knew that outside window shot was attractive, but somebody must have looked at it in the editing room because it revealed too much about the size of their house, which was enormous, and it revealed too much about the enormous size of their property and how stinking far their mansion was from another mansion way down the street. So as a producer, remember, I'm used to doing these things for a variety of things. I'm realizing this entire camera setup, this entire interview is being taken place technically from inside the house of this famous couple in ministry that are worth millions. But this couple's number one concern, obviously expressed to the office producer, because the producer, I guarantee you, would have wanted plenty of juicy inside shots of that palatial house. And that producer would have wanted at least one beautiful exterior of the front of the mansion. And he certainly would have wanted one of down the block to see that this was a mansion all by itself. Instead, this shot hides all of the things the audience wants to see. What's the overwhelming concern of this, of people being interviewed? They don't want to show anything that would suggest or hint at or reveal how big their house was and is, how enormous it is, how palatial it is from the inside and outside, or anything else. That's the only reason you would visually block off absolutely everything, except where when you walk to the doorway, there's like the thing you scrub your feet on, the doormat on the outside, and there's a doormat on the inside. Why else would you conduct an interview with a guy who's got a mansion that could fit 25 families in it, and you restrict the entire interview to where the inside doormat area is by the door, and you're kind of like in this like 1/10 of a room that shows you nothing because you're hiding. You don't want the audience to guess through visuals just what a palace you live in. Now, the problem with this is not first and foremost the enormous wealth, the palace, the mansion, the exclusivity of the neighborhood. A problem with it is the methodical pre-planning and methodical sneaky tricks you used to what appears to be, some people may disagree with me, I'm not claiming to be the world's greatest expert, but what appears to be the deliberate hiding of any visual shot that would suggest or reveal your wealth, your antique furniture, your expensive rugs, your paintings, all the things that that show wealth, including the size and magnificence of the architecture and its position. You understand what I'm saying? So what we have on one hand is we have somebody playing dumb so they can stay popular with everybody and fail God, preaching of the gospel with integrity. And number two is you have the deliberate, methodical concealment of anything that would feel or give the audience an idea of just how filthy rich these people are. Both of which boil down to deception, being sneaky and dishonest. Because if you had nothing to hide, and you really were hardworking, middle class, whatever, you'd let them inside. Because it wouldn't, there must be something, either they're just stupid, or there's something inside that dwelling which just reeks of obscene wealth. Because people expect people of a certain stature to be wealthy. I'm not saying that I'm not that wealthy. I'm not even in the same club. Wouldn't be if I was asked to join, by the way. I know neighborhoods. I know people, let's just put it that way, in many different high-end businesses. And I know lots of regular people in many working class businesses. My inner circle of friends is not contingent upon wealth, fame, fortune, etc. Okay? You don't have to drive a BMW or a Mercedes to meet. My circle of friends consists of people from all different racial groups, all different middle class, upper class, working class, because I don't have these rules, and I don't want to be part of this exclusive thing. So what I'm saying is these become giant strongholds in the mass culture, because then Christianity becomes symbolic with materialism and self-centeredness. Now, I'll give you the name of someone else to show you how important it is to balance. And somebody will probably criticize me for defending somebody. I'm talking about, I'll say, a very well-known female evangelist. Okay? Very wealthy, very well-known, sold millions of books, etc., etc. So the big newspaper of where the city that she lives in, did this big hit and expose piece on her, all right, saying how evil it was for her to build a mansion and then several smaller but very large houses and mansions and gazebo and garden and stuff in a kind of luxurious enclave that's very large, so that her whole family can come and live in houses near her, and then they can be together as a family. Now, my perspective on that individual is entirely different than on the past individual. First of all, whether you disagree with your theology or agree with her theology, the critique is not based on her theology. Okay? The critique I'm giving is trying to use the same honesty and scrutiny in examining this person's life, who's very wealthy, lives in a very wealthy manner. Again, this is not about the person's theology. But this giant newspaper attacked her, and I don't know, they attacked her 7 Sundays in a row. They special. So I read all those articles. This was back when I was working on Paul McGuire's show. I read all the articles. I saw all the photographs of the housing, the plans, the interiors, current photos, interviews. And all I could tell, my initial reaction, please forgive me if I take this the wrong way, was, what's this all about? Because the total dollar amounts that this lady had spent to be with her husband and family and to build all these houses, along with the acreage and along with I would say it's a mansion, but it's a modest mansion. The other houses, if you compare them to LA standards, let's just cut to the bottom line. She was attacked for, living in a mansion, buying mansions for all her daughters, relatives, creating this beautiful enclave for her family with trees and gazebo, pool, and stuff. And her stated intent over and over again was she wanted God had blessed her, and she wanted to be able to live close. Most families are separated. God had blessed her, and she wanted to be able to live close together with her different family members, their daughters and husbands and stuff. Okay, that sounds like a noble thing. They say it's a lie. I don't know. I'm not judging her about that. I'm just looking at the dollar amount total. This local newspaper, a relatively big city, is attacking her constantly. But I'm looking at the dollar amount of what every house is worth, what the dollar amount of the property is worth, what the dollar amount of her swimming pool and her own personal mansion is worth. Now, don't be offended. This is just the way economics works. Her city was a famous city, well-known city, not a super affluent city, but a notable city in the Midwest. That's all I'm going to tell you. It could be a city like Cincinnati, or it could be a city kind of like Oklahoma City. Many different cities with kind of similar size, well, etc. Okay, so what I did is I looked at all the numbers and I was shocked because this, they were doing this huge crusade against this woman, and what her house and what her property was worth, and what all the other houses individually were worth, was really relatively modest. I know this is shocking. What the dollar amount of all the soaps, she was supposed to be such a princess and was filthy rich. What the dollar amount for all her real estate, swimming pools, and enclave she lived in, everything, financially would not have been, the dollar amount for it would have not raised an eyebrow in many, 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 many places in Southern California. All right? Southern California, we have so many areas that are the wealthiest. I don't know how many the wealthiest zip code neighborhoods we have in both Orange County, Newport Beach, San Diego, Beverly Hills, Bel Air. I mean, we could go on and on and on. There's rich movie stars, actors, directors, scientists. There are so many just regular mansions and large houses with large acreage that cost no more than what she paid for her gigantic mansion. People have houses and properties. I'm not saying everybody in LA and California is rich by any means. That's not my point. The point is, remember, the state of California has 39 million people in it. The state of California has 39 million people in it. So, obviously, and it's a wealthy state, despite the fact that they tax you to death. So, there are so many neighborhoods that if you compared the total cost on what this female evangelist spent, it wouldn't have raised an eyebrow. Because what was considered this obscene amount of money she spent on her mansions and stuff in her city was not quite as much, but basically pocket change compared to what she would have had to spend in California. What she bought, I don't remember what the total of what she bought was. Let's say this is close to it. It was somewhere between 12.5 million, 16 million. I don't think it was as high as 8. I really don't. I'd say 16, 15 million. At least at the time. Let's say 14 million. At the time the article was written. Maybe it's appreciated. Yeah, it would have to have been around 14 million because it was, or 7 million. It would have had to have been that area, because when I first saw it, I said, this is what all the big deal is about. It's not that I'm rich. I'm not comparing her price to me. I'm a middle class guy, okay? By choice. By choice. I could be far more of an upper class guy, and I'm not knocking you if you are upper class. I chose this because I chose the ministry. No, I'm not saying ministers have to be poor, but ministers do have to do what God tells them. So this is not, I'm a middle class guy, period. So she's being attacked, and yet and the accusation is she spent $14.5 million in this whole thing. That's nothing. You can get huge mansions overlooking the beach, overlooking the Hollywood Hills in California for like $7 million, $4 million, $5 million. Okay? Up in those Hollywood Hills. I lived in those Hollywood Hills, okay? You say, well, how did you live in the Hollywood Hills? Well, let me tell you the whole story. The realtor took my wife around. Where did she want to live? The Hollywood Hills, okay? I had heard of Lookout Mountain, where we used to live. I had heard of Laurel Canyon, where we used to live. But we lived in the Hollywood Hills. We had a small ski cabin style home that was built onto a long slope of a mountain, the whole slope. At that time, it was very inexpensive when we bought it. Very inexpensive. In fact, it was the least expensive house up on, or one of the least expensive houses in a good area of Lookout Mountain. So we could afford it because it was an inexpensive house. It had one bedroom. It's a small bedroom. I wrote my first books from there. But in our small ski cabin-like Hollywood house, every other house in the neighborhood, including the people that lived across from me, next to me, the side of me, and as you went up the mountain, our house was worth, this was back years ago, okay? I think our house back then was $300,000. Don't tell me that's a lot. This was back then. You're talking about the Hollywood Hills, okay? You can't get in for less than that. That same $300,000 at that time would have bought me a mansion in many, 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 many places in the United States. Now, the other thing was, our house was the least expensive house in the area. Everybody around us had $1 million and up houses. In fact, the further you went up Lookout Mountain, people's mansions were $35 million, $25 million, $10 million, $8 million, some $40 million, and $50, $60 million ones. Yet our house was probably, back at that time, around $300,000. Well, you know the old expression, it's best to have the least expensive house in the most expensive neighborhood. We didn't do it for that reason. We did it because we wanted to live like in a forest with a country. And only later did we find out that Madonna lived up on the top of the mountain, Spielberg, I mean, you name the names of the rock stars, famous producers, famous this, famous that. I mean, when you got up to where Spielberg lived, and people of this caliber, they all had $35, $40 million plus massive estates. Okay, that's big money. This evangelist that they were picking on, yeah, it may have been bigger than most of the houses in the neighborhood, but most of the houses in the neighborhood were like middle-class houses. She didn't choose to live in Beverly Hills or someplace like that. So what I'm saying is, I want to make it very clear. I think it is unfair to attack people just because they have wealth or land. Only you, if you want to know about somebody, you can find out about someone. But if their lifestyle, everybody's called to things different. So I don't ridicule, accuse, and attack people just because they're wealthy or just because they're poor or just because they're middle class. My spiritual father, one of the greatest men of God, I believe, to walk the earth, was Dr. Jack Hayford. Jack Hayford personally trained thousands of pastors. That was one of his big things. I was with his ministry for like 27 years. 27 years I was at Church on the Way, working very closely with Jack Hayford, involved all kinds of special projects with him, like writing Bibles and definitions inside the Bibles, commentaries in Bibles, writing other stuff, speaking at the Sunday night and Wednesday night services as the main preacher or guest preacher, on and on, television programs, all kinds of things. And I remember the first time I went over to Jack Hayford's house. And Jack Hayford, I don't know what he's worth or was worth or whatever, but I do know this. If he wanted to be worth 20, 30, 40, $50 million, he could have been at any time, because Jack Hayford is a prolific hymn and songwriter, and many, many, many of the best-selling hymns, the good hymns that are being sung in churches today, were written by Jack Hayford. But he very modestly doesn't uses his initials or something, so people don't always know it. So just the royalties on the copyright, or whatever you call it, for all those songs that he wrote and composed, because those royalties were sung everywhere. It's like record sales. He could be worth $50 million or more. I doubt it, but easily. Okay, and he earned it. That was outside of his salary, and I think at one point he chose to work for like nothing at Church on the Way. But the first thing that struck me when I went into his house was that it was a house, I would say upper middle class house. It was upper middle class versus middle class because it was a good area of town, and because it had lots of rooms, and they did a whole add-on rooms, and it had a relatively large back area. But but when you walked in, it was not palatial. It was a middle-class home, tastefully done, warm, a middle-class home. Okay, and I knew Jack, and I knew that he deliberately chose that home for two reasons. One, he was teaching personally groups of pastors for years, and he would invite them into his home. He would regularly invite the congregation to come in groups into his home, to see his home, to walk through his home. And then he would regularly meet with dignitaries and national religious leaders and political figures and scientists and all kinds of important people in his home. So his home had to have a dual function. It had to be warm and, let's say, middle class in its appeal, to make it warm and accepting to pastors and people of congregation. Yet at the same time, it needed to be delicately and slightly, not palatial or upscale, but maintained at a standard that somebody was the CEO of a major corporation or vice president came to visit, whatever. It could function for either purpose. And I know that's how Jack Hayford thought. And I also know that Jack Hayford, because I talked to him and I heard his sermons for a million years, I also know that Jack Hayford would never have bought a palatial-looking house, even though he could have bought one times over. I know Jack Hayford would not have done it. I know that Jack Hayford would not have done that, because foremost in Jack Hayford's mind was not only the wisdom, but he didn't ever want to do anything that would cause anybody to stumble. And parishioners, people who went to the church, would have stumbled if they saw Jack Hayford looking like a big-time rich man, which he deliberately chose not to do. Now, once again, Dr. Jack Hayford, I had the privilege of teaching at his seminary and college for, 20 years as a professor of eschatology or Bible prophecy, professor of ecclesiology, and befriending the man and talking to him privately, personally, on occasions, asking things that other people didn't have the opportunity to. But I knew the way the man thought because his preaching matched up with his lifestyle. And in fact, when I was having lunch with him recently, I wanted counsel from him. Unfortunately, I can't share the nature of the counsel. It doesn't have anything to do personally. It doesn't have anything to do with a family member. But it was a very, very high-level individual had read my book, had read some articles by me, read one of my books, The Prophecy of the Future of America. And let's just put it this way, this person was extremely high up, both politically and in military-industrial complex, for lack of better. And I just simply told Jack, call him Pastor Jack, that we talked about a lot of stuff. I told him that my wife and I, Chris, always thank God for his powerful teaching and emphasis on marriage. I said it was like at a rivet gun, and you take giant pieces of metal, riveting them together. Now, if you don't know what riveting is, I don't know. Riveting, when I was a kid, there were still memories, at least, or talks about World War II and stuff. And they would turn giant assembly plants in places like San Diego, where women would have to volunteer primarily to use rivet guns to build battleships and ships and tanks, where it would take two plates of metal, and it would be like a giant screw kind of that would bolted through thick metal, and then it would bolt in and would fuse, making two pieces of metal armor or metal ship hull into one. It wouldn't even leak. Air couldn't pass through. So there was this famous lady, and Pastor Jack didn't know that I would know about it or I would remember, but I'm curious about everything. Basically, remember anything that interests me. So I shocked him because there's an age difference between. Couldn't believe that somebody of my age actually knew all about the person was just about to bring up. He said, "Do you know what today is?" And I said, "No, Pastor Jack, no." He said, "Today is the anniversary or something of Rosie the Riveteer." He goes, "Do you know?" With great excitement, because then he thinks, maybe this guy isn't going to know who we're talking about because he's too young. Well, I said, "Jack, I know who Rosie the Riveteer is." And I had to look him right in the eye to convince him that I did, because I did. Rosie the Riveteer was this famous lady in all these magazines. She was like an ordinary housewife, but she was working for the defense industry in World War II. And her job, among the job of thousands and thousands of other women, they were enlisted in wartime to help assemble, military weapons like tanks and battleships and stuff like that. And they would use rivet guns, these powerful pressure guns, to fuse together plates of metal. You've seen these, right? You've seen, if you ever visited like a military boat in the Navy or something, or a tank or an armored metallic vehicle, you'll often see the plates of metal like in the ship's hull. And then you'll see very uniformly, straight in a row, you might see 12 or 14 giant circles, metallic circles, which represent the head of a rivet or like a steel screw, but it fuses in and it bolts together the two pieces of metal. You can't see the whole thing. The only thing you can see is the head of the rivet, which is usually circular and somewhat shiny. So he was all excited, and he was excited that I actually knew who Rosie the Riveteer was. But she was famous. She was used to promote the war and stuff. And he said, I'm going to use I'm going to use what you just told me. I'm speaking, and he was having lunch with me, and he said, I'm going to go give a men's meeting in the next couple hours. And he said, I'm going to talk about this, what we talked about, my message. I was all excited because Jack Hayford was always walking around, like a normal human being. But the Lord would continually speak to Jack through things like what I brought up, or somebody else might bring up, or some unusual thing or sign. So he wasn't mystical in the sense of being a nut. He knew when the Lord. There's a difference. See, this is what happens in the Christian culture. You've got all these people who call themselves prophets. I'm not here to be the judge of whether they're prophets or not. I am called to discern the spirits. I am called to evaluate the prophets, and if someone is speaking false doctrine, I'm to rebuke that prophet in an appropriate manner. But the basic rule is that it's the Word of God first. But with Jack Hayford, he adhered to that rule, but he also knew when the Lord, in the course of a casual conversation where we were there to discuss a need that I had, in the course of talking, something came up, became even more amplified because I actually knew who he was talking about. Most people wouldn't have known. And that became the theme, because what I for the message he was going to give to the men. And the reason it was so powerful is I said, if you had, before he realized I knew who Rosie the Riveteer was, he said, Jack, the reason my wife and I are still married today is because you pounded your teachings on marriage, on faithfulness and commitment. I said, you pounded those messages into our hearts like a rivet gun. And I stopped. And then there was a small pause, and he says, a rivet gun? He looks at me and goes, did you know that today is the anniversary for Rosie the Riveteer? And I said, no, I didn't know it was her anniversary. He says, you know who she is, of course. He was being polite. I said, yeah, of course I know who she is. And I told him, so I wasn't just blowing smoke in his eyes. But the point was, when he would interact or whatever, or I would go to his house, it was not palatial. It was a very nice upper middle class, but it had a homey touch. His wife's handiwork, shaping and molding it. It was warm. It was in a nice neighborhood. It was relatively near a golf course, but it wasn't one of those snooty golf course communities. It was one that he'd bought a long time ago. And in fact, the church bought it early in his ministry for nothing, and it grew in value. But Jack Hayford, one of the most influential, and that's what I mean when I'm always talking about influential and effective, the ministry of Jack Hayford was not just that he was famous. He was effective, and he was effectual. That's the important thing. He was effective and effectual. The fame part is not what God's interested in. That's a byproduct. Goal is to be effective. When you stand before Larry King and you can't answer 6 first grade, second grade, third grade questions on the Bible that any kid who goes to Sunday school can answer, and you're the most famous Christian leader in America, that's rather pathetic. I'm being kind. Another man who I became good friends with in the latter part of his ministry was Pastor Chuck Smith of Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. And Calvary Chapel movement was birthed out of Chuck Smith at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. And when so what happened was I spoke at a big conference that Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa had with Chuck Smith and other people. So then we got to know each other, and I would meet Pastor Chuck Smith in his office. We talked there for an hour and a half. And then he was always gracious enough. He'd take me out to lunch at just a nice, Applebee's. It wasn't Applebee's, but something like that. Okay, I don't know if it served booze or not. That's irrelevant. He didn't drink. I didn't. So, but we would have very intense conversations, very intimate conversations. Some that had to do with all kinds of current events, things happening in the church, because he knew he could trust me. He knew that Paul McGuire was whatever was said to Paul McGuire would stay with Paul McGuire. The reason he knew that is my reputation through Jack Hayford, and that Jack Hayford doesn't have anybody in his inner circle that's not trustworthy. So we would talk a lot about a lot of different things. And the one thing I noticed about Chuck Smith, he was roommates, ironically, with Pastor Jack Hayford at a Bible college. The interesting thing about Chuck Smith was he, very much like Jack Hayford, met the same high-level people, ordinary people, middle-class people. And Pastor Chuck's life, like Pastor Jack's life, was very similar in the way they deliberately chose their lifestyle and the caliber of their lifestyle. They could have met with a president or a plumber, and both would have felt comfortable. Neither of these men were ostentatious. They weren't showy. One of the things that surprised me the most about Jack Hayford did not drive some high-end, Mercedes or palatial car that so many ministers drive. Could have afforded it any time over. A lot of these guys with these gigantic ministries and mansions, if I don't know how much of Jack Hayford's money he keeps, how much he gives away. I do know that he's a huge giver, as Chuck Smith is a huge giver. But I also know that Jack Hayford is not a hoarder. So he and Chuck Smith and all the great men of God that are givers. They all give, and don't think that their prominence, their promotion, the willingness of God to entrust them with millions of people, don't think that that is separate from their faithfulness in money and in giving. The two go hand in hand. Okay, so we would talk, but with Pastor Chuck Smith, he had many similarities in his accessibility, in not wanting brothers and sisters of Christ to stumble because of his affluent wealth. He did not have affluent wealth as a personal individual. And so this is a characteristic there. And it's not Paul McGuire's job to judge people. So I'm not going to do it. But there's a difference between being effective, famous, affluent, and there's a difference between being wealthy and managing your money properly, being a good steward, being a good ambassador for Jesus Christ. The showiest show in town is not always the most godly. So I just wanted to encourage you with that and close with this. God knows who you are. There was a time in Jack Hayford's life when nobody knew his name. There was definitely a time in Pastor Chuck Smith when nobody knew his name. There were many, 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 many times in Paul McGuire's life where nobody knew his name. My life has been interesting by God because there are times when God has promoted me and raised me up on levels so high that I would never believe to be told in advance. All the Fox News Network appearances on big shows, being a Fox News commentator on a regular basis on CNN, being a regular commentator on the biggest shows of the Fox Business Network, being the subject of History Channel specials, multiple History Channel specials, speaking at conferences, having my own national television show seen by countless millions of people, being a feature film producer, Many of these things give you a level of prominence and fame. But just as easily as those things come and go, like the tides, you can be famous one minute and you can be walking in obscurity the next minute. And I've always considered that a gift from God. You know why? Because people say to me all the time, Paul, how do you stay humble? And I laugh. I laugh not because I'm proud. I laugh because I'm staying humble, not because I'm some virtuous, great guy. That's why I'm humble. I'm humble because God regularly raises up trials in my life that force me to be dependent upon me and force me to humble myself before the Lord. So if you see humility in me, it's because God lovingly shapes his servants and he humbles them. Otherwise, they're useless to him. So I thought maybe that would bless you. Side stories, and I want to close with this. The thing about these great men of God that I've met, and women, is they really walk with the Lord when people are looking and nobody's looking. That does not mean they're perfect. Let me emphasize that. They're not perfect, but they're willing. And so what happens is that decisions they make, they're human like the rest of us. They're always leaning on the Lord. They're always listening for the Lord's voice in something. And they don't move. They don't decide until they hear from the Lord. And then when they hear from the Lord, when the Lord says something to them, they have developed the habit of obeying whatever the Lord says. See, the people who are complaining all the time, I haven't heard from the Lord. I keep praying and the skies are bronze. I pray and pray, but God never answers me. There's a reason why that happens. It's not accidental. The reason you're not hearing from God, the reason that it doesn't seem like God is answering your prayer, the reason it's like your prayers are like bronze, hard, nothing happens, they don't break into the heavens. This is the reason. If in your private personal lifestyle you have developed the habit of ignoring the voice of God or ignoring a commandment of God or ignoring a dream or a direction from God, if you've developed that subtle habit of ignoring him, he speaks to you, you have trained your human spirit to be deaf to God, and you can no longer recognize whether he's speaking to you because you have practiced and rehearsed shutting his voice down and shutting him out. So when you're walking around and the Lord speaks to you in a still small voice, or the Lord commands you to do this, or the Lord tells you to do that, you have cultivated such a long-term habit of ignoring him, disobeying him, that when he speaks to you in the present moment, you don't even know if he's speaking. You've lost the capacity to hear the authentic voice of God, not asking you if you'd like to do something, commanding you to do something. Now, men like Jack Hayford, Chuck Smith, other great God, they have maintained the habit of humbling themselves before the Lord, of actually hearing the Lord and obeying the Lord when he speaks. And so that means when they're living their everyday lives and God tells them to do something, even though the doing of whatever God has said to do is inconvenient, it may cost them money, it's not what they planned on, it goes against their plans, ideas, and wishes. Even though all that is occurring, they have trained their inner man or inner woman to obey the Lord when he speaks. Okay? So with God, I was with a great man of God, okay? And we were having lunch with him, his wife, and this pastor from India and his wife. And the pastor from India, his wife was poor, and he was actually kind of boldly asking this well-known pastor, who I respect, for money. And, I didn't know his relationship with the guy. I didn't know how this great pastor normally handles these situations. I, being an outsider, so I could have been completely remiss, thought this guy from India was a little bold in just asking for money. It was kind of like, in my mind, he expected that just because this guy was famous and American, that he should ask him money. And of course, he said, God told me to ask him. Well, first of all, this was not my call, my decision to make. It was this pastor. I was having lunch with his wife, famous American pastor. But this pastor did walk with God and obeyed God. And I thought I could see in his eyes him using his discernment, analyzing the situation. And I could be wrong because I can't read the mind, but it seemed to me that he was aware of the fact that this pastor had only come to him because he was known as a famous pastor, that his ministry was a large ministry, which had large finances, and that he was well known all around the world. So like he could see in the eyes of this Indian pastor that he was, I don't know whether he knew for sure what the Lord told him to come to him, because that would have borne witness to his spirit, or the guy just did it because the pastor looked like he was successful monetarily. Okay, I don't know what this pastor knew. I suspect he's hit up all the time, and he has a fairly good sense of who God told to come to him and the normal reason people come. That's just because he's known as having power, wealth, and influence. But as I appraised the situation, I could have been wrong. I sense that this well-known pastor could very well have known that the motive for this guy asking him for money, this pastor asking for money, he could have very well known, because he was very astute, that he was being hit up because of his reputation of having a large ministry, raising lots of money, and being famous. So the Indian pastor, saw him in a worldly sense as a kind of a soft target to hit up for money. It was my sense that this famous American pastor, I'm not saying he passed judgment on him, but that's how he phrased him. But I was surprised when he very quickly told the guy that he would be giving him, well, a little bit later on in the conversation, that he'd be giving the guy, that their ministry would be giving the guy a check, and they named the amount. And it wasn't the most massive amount in the world, but it was certainly a very healthy and respectable donation to his ministry. And I pondered it, because I said, he must be asked this question all the time. And I would have to say, I never discussed it with him, but I would have to say, because this guy was astute, I would have to say that he knew that he was not sure that God told him that he was to go see. Okay, even though the guy said it. He was not sure that the guy wasn't just approaching because he's an easy target. He's known as a famous American evangelist, and he has a large ministry, therefore he has money, therefore I'm going to ask him for money. That's very possible how this famous American pastor perceived the guy. But even after perceiving the guy as possibly that was his real motive, he did make the choice voluntarily, because this guy doesn't get taken advantage of, made the choice voluntarily of giving a substantial donation to this guy's ministry and his wife's ministry in India. And as I processed that on the plane on the way home, what came to me was Jesus. That this pastor, who I respect very much, this pastor knew the guy was using him as a soft tussle, but he had compassion on him anyway, and he gave to the man's ministry and the wife's ministry, because they did come from a very poor country. He gave them money because he was trying to communicate with the love of Jesus. He was not trying to communicate to this guy a message of judgment against this guy's ministry. He was trying to minister as Jesus would. And Jesus may well have, in certain cases, looked into someone's heart and seen the struggle in their heart, the fear that they have. And Jesus may have decided to bless this man anyway, because it's more important that he's won to the kingdom, full well knowing that the guy was trying to deceive him. Not that Jesus is a fool, not that this guy was a fool, but his heart was to reach him for Christ, despite the fact that he may have been. He overlooked. It was kind of like the expression "noblesse oblige," the French expression, which means the obligation of nobility, obligation of the rich, and that was this societal knowing that the elite pastimes, the nobles, the wealthy men, have an obligation to the common man and the poor to help to feed them, give them housing, give them employment, use their wealth to help them. It's their obligation as nobles, noblesse oblige. In America, we've lost that. I'm so materialistic. So, just a few pointers. I shouldn't say pointers. A sharing of motives in ministry and how that really affects outcomes. This is Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us. Help us spread the message far and wide to go around internet censorship. Send the links out far and wide. Spread these programs far and wide. And finally, we need you to be involved in intercessory prayer for me, my family, and this ministry. Very important. Heard about the fires and stuff like that. And all I want to say is that this ministry is able to make disciples of Christ and win people to Jesus Christ because you're willing to spread the message far and wide, and you're willing to take on a mantle of spiritual intercession and wage warfare for me and my family and this ministry in the heavenlies. So please continue your spiritual warfare. And finally, it takes finances to win a spiritual war. We're active in a number of things that I can't talk about publicly, because if I talk about publicly, I invite counterattacks on the ministry. So I'm not going to do that. For the present, we're involved in a number of projects of national and international impact. And it's imperative that we effectively reach people effectively with the gospel of Jesus Christ. We make disciples of all nations and all age and ethnic groups with the gospel of Jesus Christ, and that we fully utilize and expand into the new technology. This new technology that many ministries are not using, maybe because they're not aware of it yet, will enable us to use brand new social media platforms where we will not be in jeopardy of being censorship by big brother social media companies and internet companies. If ministries like this, we lose our capacity to really win people to Jesus Christ and make disciples of all nations, we lose that capacity when big tech and other sneaky entities chop away at our broadcasting, our internet programs, because they keep changing the rules. Even this week as we're speaking, YouTube is going to launch a new rule that is going to effectively paralyze and diminish every Christian ministry in America and the world. Because your ability to mass send out YouTubes, which is essential, okay, and reaching people quickly. And notice that so many of these new rules and new contracts that you're being given by the social media and internet companies, that the activation date for the new policy is at the end of this month. Right in time for election, they short circuit the people's voice, so all you can hear is the corporate voice. That's not an accident. So we have in our sites the capability of acquiring new technologies for the internet, for social media, for communication that will not allow us to be censored, which will allow us to do an end run around censorship and will allow us to reach more people than ever without fear of being torn down or censored or rigged search engines. But to move into this technology is going to require a substantial increase in our ministry operating budget. But I have no choice. I can continue reaching the same number of people But that's foolish because that number of people is being shrunk daily through computer censorship. Or I can see what God is telling us to do ahead and acquire new technologies that are being birthed right now. They're already past the test phase, which will give us a platform to win people to Jesus Christ and not be censored and completely obliterated. And we have to move now, because if we don't, the legal and financial opportunity to acquire these technologies while they're still affordable and while they're still in reach of smaller ministries and businesses, etc. We have to move now. And that's not a salesman's gimmick to hustle you. It's the truth. If we fail to move, these costs are going to skyrocket. So we need your financial help, and I need some of you. God has blessed you or is going to bless you enormously on a financial level in the relatively near future. I want you to remember that I said that to you. And I want you to remember that I said that to you, and I want you to remember that when it happens, that you remember that God blessed you. We're told about it beforehand, and that you would obey the Lord when He speaks to you and give according to how God has blessed and given you. And for others, give as God has instructed you, because as we say regularly, a lot of people being faithful with small donations, it adds up. We're in this together. We either win this together or we will lose this together. God bless you, your brother in Christ. Visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us.